Here's a question for you. What exactly is a country? Is it a place, a geographical landscape to call home? Is it a people, a community built on shared stories, traditions, and cultures? Or is it an idea, a nation founded on certain unshakable principles? And for most, it's a bit of all three. A country is a territory claimed by a state, shaped by the culture and ideals its people share. But what happens when there's a piece of land that no country wants? What if, for whatever reason, a nation says, no thanks to otherwise perfectly fine territory? Why would a country actively choose to do that, especially when it's land within their control? It seems like an odd move for a country to decline territory, but it does happen. Scattered around the globe are a few tiny rare places where land has gone unclaimed by any nation. And that raises another question. If there's land no nation wants and even actively disclaims, then why not take it for yourself? I mean, you might not know how to run a country, but hey, that doesn't stop plenty of others from planting a flag and staking a claim. So today's video explores where ambition meets absurdity, a tiny forgotten strip of desert that has lured people from all over to try and make it their own. Welcome to Bir Tawil, the land that no country claims. So let's start by giving you a quick rundown of Bir Tawil before diving into its history. The region is sometimes called a triangle, although it's really shaped more like a trapezoid. It covers 2,060 square kilometers, or just under 800 square miles for those of you using freedom units. To be blunt, there's not much to Bir Tawil at first glance. If not for a colonial era loophole, we might not even know it exists. The landscape is mostly sand, rocks, and a lot more sand, with a few hills sprinkled in as well. It lies in one of the most inhospitable places on Earth. It has no permanent population, no coastline, no water, no farmable land. It's also tough to reach, nestled on the Egyptian-Sudanese border in the middle of the Nubian desert. Getting there takes days, and the closer you get, the less infrastructure you'll find. So, well, pack your camping gear. When we dig into its past, we can see why this unremarkable strip of desert has occasionally made international headlines, though. In 1986, the British Empire was at its height, ruling vast territories with the world's largest navy and superior technology. One such territory was Egypt. At the time, European powers were racing to colonize Africa, carving it up for resources. With Britain already in control of Egypt after a series of wars, the focus shifted to securing the empire's wealth from any potential threats. Sudan, previously under Egyptian rule, had fallen to a revolt led by the religious leader Muhammad Ahmad, also known as Mahdi. His forces, the Mahdists, had taken control, but Egypt, under British Prime Minister Lord Salisbury, launched a campaign to secure the Nile's source and prevent rival powers from taking it. Leading this effort was General Herbert Kitchener, the same man later immortalized in a famous British war poster, by the way. Kitchener argued that occupying Sudan was essential to protect Egypt and safeguard trade routes to India. By 1899, the Mahdists were defeated, and Sudan's capital, Khartoum, was recaptured. With the military campaign over, Britain did what it often did, drew borders, typically straight lines, with little regard to the people living there. The Anglo-Egyptian Condominium Agreement of 1899 formalized Sudan's borders south of the 22nd parallel, while everything north became Egyptian territory. Now, on the surface, it seems just like another arbitrary colonial boundary. But as with many British-drawn borders, complications would emerge later on. A small region just south of the 22nd parallel, home to the nomadic Ababda tribe, was more culturally linked to Egypt than Sudan. However, the 1899 border placed it within Sudanese territory. To resolve this, the British made a revision in 1902, assigning this area, Bir Tawil, to Egyptian administration. Meanwhile, a much larger area north of the 22nd parallel, the Halaib Triangle, was designated for Sudanese tribes, particularly the Beja people, for grazing. Understanding Bir Tawil is impossible without also addressing the Halaib Triangle. The Beja people primarily lived in Sudan, so the Halaib Triangle was placed under Sudanese administration in 1902. For many years, this arrangement worked without issue, largely because Britain had control over both Egypt and Sudan, and any disputes could be swiftly managed by colonial authorities. However, this second border, the administrative one, overlapping the original political boundary, created a cartographical oddity. When both Egypt and Sudan eventually gained independence, the question arose, which of these borders would now apply? The 1899 agreement placed everything above the 22nd parallel within Egypt, while the 1902 adjustment gave part of Sudan to Egypt and Halaib to Sudan. And like many British colonial boundaries, this setup was bound to cause problems, indeed problems that continue to this day. Disputes over the Egyptian-Sudanese border really took off after Sudan gained independence in 1956. The newly established government in Khartoum immediately declared that its national borders followed the 1902 agreement, which put the Halaib Triangle under Sudanese control. Egypt, however, disagreed, arguing that the 1902 agreement only addressed temporary administrative jurisdictions, while true sovereignty was set by the earlier 1899 treaty. According to Egypt, the border remained as it was originally drawn in 1899, straight across the 22nd parallel, making the Halaib Triangle Egyptian. The Halaib Triangle is highly coveted by both nations. It grants access to the Red Sea, giving either country valuable global shipping routes, fishing rights, and strategic military access. Additionally, the region is rich in natural resources, including gold and copper, making it economically attractive. Unlike Bir Tawil, the Halaib Triangle is also more habitable, with a settled population and a climate that supports some economic activity. And here's where things get interesting. This tug-of-war over the Halaib Triangle, combined with the messy colonial-era borders, brings us to Bir Tawil. The only significant difference between the two borders drawn up in 1899 and 1902 is the ownership of the Halaib Triangle and, of course, Bir Tawil. But while the Halaib Triangle is fertile, spacious, and valuable, Bir Tawil is the complete opposite. It's small, it's barren, and it lacks any permanent population. It's also entirely landlocked. So you might wonder why Egypt and Sudan don't just claim Bir Tawil along with everything else. The catch is that under the competing border agreements, claiming Bir Tawil would mean forfeiting the Halaib Triangle. No country is going to give up such a valuable area in exchange for a tiny, useless strip of desert. And that's how Bir Tawil ended up in its current strange situation. No country claiming it. The ancient Romans had a term for such land, terra nullius, or nobody's land. In 1958, Sudan made an attempt to hold elections in the Halaib Triangle, but Egyptian President Gamal Abdel Nasser quickly intervened by sending troops into the region. Nasser was looking to assert Egypt's control over the area and stoke nationalist pride ahead of a successful referendum to unify Egypt and Syria, hence why Egypt's official name became the United Arab Republic. However, this bold move didn't go over well internationally. After a significant backlash, Egypt withdrew its troops, and the Halaib Triangle continued to participate in Sudanese elections administered according to the 1902 border until the 1990s. And that's when things got complicated. Oil was discovered in the Halaib Triangle, along with more mineral resources, suddenly making the border dispute much more than just a historical technicality. In 1995, under President Hosni Mubarak, Egyptian forces entered the Halaib Triangle, ousting Sudanese authorities. This action came in response to an assassination attempt on Mubarak, which Cairo blamed on Sudan's support of Islamic militants. Since then, Egypt has maintained de facto control over the Halaib Triangle, while Sudan continues to insist the territory is theirs, even attempting to hold elections there as recently as 2010. This escalating dispute only deepened Bir Tawil's peculiar status. No longer just an unclaimed territory due to a colonial administrative loophole, Bir Tawil became a no-man's land that both Egypt and Sudan actively renounced ownership of, even to the point of military confrontation over its neighboring territories. And that's the history of Bir Tawil, a territory so undesirable that neither country surrounding it wants to claim it. You might think that that would be the end of the story, but of course, it isn't. Since Bir Tawil is officially terra nullius, various individuals from around the world have attempted to claim it for themselves. Their motivations range from somewhat understandable to outright bizarre. After all, with both Egypt and Sudan saying, no thank you, what's stopping someone from planting a flag and declaring it theirs? So, let's now meet a colourful cast of would-be monarchs who've poured time and resources into creating their own fake micronations. Now, one question you have to ask anyone bold or perhaps mad enough to try claiming Bir Tawil as their own is, well, why? It's already well established that Bir Tawil is practically useless. It has no permanent population, with only nomadic tribes occasionally passing through. The land is nearly all desert and rocky plateaus with no arable soil to speak of. There are no abundant natural resources, no minerals, no oil. There aren't even rivers, with the nearest water source, the Nile, miles away to the east. It also holds no military value. It's mostly flat, barren, and uninhabited. And to top it all off, the region is dangerous, with militant forces roaming nearby as Sudan remains embroiled in a brutal civil war that's been raging since 2018. So what on earth could convince someone that this barren stretch of land could be transformed into a nation? Well, Ambition, for one. I mean, who would want to be the ruler of their very own kingdom? And greed might be another valuable motivator. After all, if valuable resources were discovered, the claimants could enrich themselves. Some may even be drawn by a higher purpose, hoping to create a new state with a unique vision or a safe haven for a specific group of people. Over the years, Bir Tawil has attracted a strange assortment of characters, each with their own vision for the unclaimed land. The territory has been turned into all sorts of imaginary states: an emirate, a grand duchy, a kingdom, a state, even an empire. Perhaps the most famous, and one of the first to risk life and limb for a royal title, was a Virginian farmer named Jeremiah Heaton, or as he prefers to be called, the King of North Sudan. In 2014, Heaton traveled to Bir Tawil to stake his claim. Why? His daughter Emily wanted to be a princess, like many girls her age. But King Jeremiah wasn't interested in hosting a simple princess tea party. He had bigger dreams. His research led him to Bir Tawil, where he planted a flag and declared himself sovereign of the Kingdom of North Sudan, making his daughter a princess. Sort of. He even sold the film rights to Disney. Heaton's story went viral largely due to the lengths he went to for his daughter. It's not every day you see someone go to such great and slightly absurd lengths to be a good dad. He had big plans for Bir Tawil, though. His vision was to create a nation with minimal corporate regulations, a libertarian paradise where businesses could operate without government interference. He envisioned this would attract investors, sparking innovation and turning Bir Tawil into an agricultural hub. A free market economy in one of the harshest environments on Earth that would, in his mind, benefit people around the world. Unsurprisingly, Heaton's grand dreams faced a lot of criticism. Many doubted the legitimacy of his claim in the first place. Simply planting a flag doesn't cut it in modern geopolitics. You need recognition from other states, which is a pretty high hurdle. Would either of the Islamic nations surrounding Bir Tawil recognize a libertarian monarchy led by a white Christian American? Not likely. Some critics even called his move neo-colonialist. Just over a century after the region was last colonized, a foreigner shows up claiming the land and declares himself king. Then there's the practical side. With no fertile lands, no water, and no resources, Heaton's vision of an economic powerhouse was, to say the least, unrealistic. On top of that, every successful state needs control over organized violence, a monopoly on security. But Jeremiah didn't have an army or even a security force. In fact, none of the would-be rulers of Bir Tawil do. Without a way to protect their nation, what's to stop the next person with a bigger gun from coming along and kicking them out? However, King Jeremiah wasn't one to be discouraged by a few setbacks. As he told Al Jazeera, any visionary is always greeted with skepticism. To fund his micronation, he began selling naming rights to roads and offering knighthoods, a classic strategy for generating cash in any prospective micronation. And according to him, there has been real interest, though it's wise to take his claims with a grain of salt. In an interview with The Guardian, Jeremiah confidently stated, "You'd be surprised at the outrage that has occurred from the corporate level. A lot of these large corporations see market opportunities in what I'm doing." When questions about the colonial undertones of his claim, Heaton dismissed the criticism, saying, "This is not colonialism. I'm an individual, not a country. I haven't taken land that belongs to any other nation, and I'm not extracting resources unless you count sunshine and sand. I'm just one human being trying to improve the condition of other human beings. To criticize that because I'm a white guy in the Nubian desert, well, it's really juvenile." Heaton even claims to have spoken with Sudanese and Egyptian officials about potential development projects, including a solar farm that could supply energy to both nations. Despite his somewhat fantastical vision, Heaton is not entirely naive. He acknowledges the need for international recognition, telling Vice, "Without some sort of business arrangements with either of the neighbors, you don't have a state." One of the more amusing aspects of his venture was the diplomatic trolling it triggered. According to Heaton, Egyptian officials expressed concern that Sudan might object if Egypt recognized North Sudan as occupying Bir Tawil. Essentially, Egypt said, "We don't mind, it's not our land, but Sudan might get upset." It's a subtle dig, and a perfect example of political posturing, as well as a reminder of the real and ongoing dispute between Egypt and Sudan over the Halaib Triangle. Jeremiah was confident that the Kingdom of North Sudan would eventually become a reality, but a revolution in Sudan in 2018 threw a wrench in his plans. With political upheaval in Khartoum, any progress or agreements Heaton had been working on came to a halt. He remains convinced that the revolution is the reason his libertarian agribusiness micronation hasn't come to fruition yet. He told Vice, quote, "If it were for the revolution, these things would have fallen into place, and Sudan would have recognized Bir Tawil as a standalone entity." Heaton is certainly the most well-known person to claim Bir Tawil, and while he wasn't the first, he's been the most successful in garnering media attention. Others have tried since, including a London barrister named Dwayne Card. His claim to the territory came with plenty of fanfare. There was a coronation, a crown, and even an oath to develop Bir Tawil for humanitarian good. However, Coward's primary motivation was environmental protection. He expressed concern over illegal mining operations in Bir Tawil, telling an interviewer, "Right now, it's open season on Bir Tawil's gold resources. There are big mining operations going on, and without any legislation, they're damaging the land. When we get in there and start drilling for water, it could be poisoned with mercury and other chemicals from the mining process. It's wreaking havoc on the land." Like Eaton, Coward had the conviction to travel to one of the most dangerous regions on Earth just to stake his claim. He may have been named Coward, but his actions prove that he was no wuss. Coward aimed to establish a state in Bir Tawil to bring accountability to the activities happening there, particularly mining operations. He was also one of the few claimants to acknowledge that the land is occasionally used by nomadic tribes. In theory, if he could gather enough support to set up a taxation system, Coward might have been able to kickstart his plans. However, this idea faces several obstacles, such as legitimacy, convincing people who pass through the region to pay taxes for future benefits that may never materialize. Moreover, the optics of a British man, even one with Jamaican roots and noble intentions like Coward claiming North African lands, are complicated given the colonial history of the region. Coward also recognizes the need for a security apparatus, telling Vice, "We're reaching out to recruits there as we need more effective control on the ground." He even established a company for the state of Bir Tawil, but according to Companies House, the accounts were overdue as of August 2024. Other attempts to claim Bir Tawil have come from a wide variety of people with different goals and levels of seriousness. In 2019, the Kingdom of Yellow Mountain, or Al-Jabal al-Asfar, was announced by Nadira Nassif, the only public figure linked to the project. A video on the Micronation's YouTube channel states that the project was created by a group of Arabs who felt called to create a refuge for Sunni Muslims displaced by the violence and persecution, though little has been heard about this initiative since. In 2015, Russian amateur radio enthusiast Dmitry Zhikarev ventured to Bir Tawil to make his own claim, but no follow-up has been reported. Another early claimant was Karim Hamdi, an Egyptian man who in 2010 issued press releases stating his intent to establish a micronation for displaced people, although he later admitted it was more of a mental exercise. In 2011, Guardian journalist Jack Schenker became one of the first people to physically travel to Bir Tawil to claim it. Perhaps the quirkiest of all is Suyash Dixit, an Indian businessman who proclaimed himself king of the Kingdom of Dixit in 2007. Like Jeremiah Heaton before him, Dixit planted a flag and sunflower seeds to symbolize his claim. He even started an online petition which garnered over 800 signatures, so you know he means business. But amid the humor and bizarre claims, the reality is that Bir Tawil is unlikely to become a recognized state anytime soon. While Egypt and Sudan may avoid directly interfering with claims to Bir Tawil to protect their positions on the Halaib Triangle, if any attempts at sovereignty got serious, both nations would likely squash it rather quickly. Gamal Malek Ahmed Goresh, a counselor at the Sudanese embassy, pointed out that although Bir Tawil is unoccupied, there is no land between Egypt and Sudan that doesn't belong to someone. Anthony Arendz, co-founder of the Institution for International Law and Politics at Georgetown University, echoed this, telling the Washington Post, "Under international law, only states can assert sovereignty over territory." This rules out the idea that an individual could successfully claim Bir Tawil. However, with Sudan currently in turmoil, it's interesting to consider what might happen if a claim gained traction. With Sudan's forces stretched thin due to ongoing internal conflict, they might struggle to respond, and Egypt might avoid stepping in to protect its hold over the Halaib Triangle. Either way, the idea of an independent Bir Tawil is, for now, little more than a geopolitical curiosity. So, where does Bir Tawil stand today? The border dispute between Sudan and Egypt continues, with Egypt still maintaining de facto control over the Halaib Triangle, a control established in the 1990s. Over time, Egypt has successfully diminished Sudanese influence in the area, helped along by Sudan's internal conflicts. There's little international pushback against Egypt's claim, but it's worth noting that the Halaib Triangle's population still aligns more ethnically and culturally with Sudan. This lingering Sudanese sentiment may resurface if Sudan ever unites again, potentially reigniting the conflict over the territory. Before Sudan's civil war escalated, Bir Tawil had become something of a tourist oddity, a small cottage industry in the area. Access from the Sudanese side was generally easier, with more relaxed security, nearby settlements, and slightly better infrastructure compared to Egypt's side. However, the ongoing civil war has made it difficult to access from either side, and it's unlikely that the situation will change until Sudan stabilizes. While Bir Tawil is one of the more famous examples of terra nullius, it is not entirely unique. There are other unclaimed pockets of land, such as along the Croatian-Serbian border, where ambitious individuals have also staked their claims. The largest and most well-known example of terra nullius, though, is Antarctica, which is designated as such by treaty, though disputes over global influence in the region persist. At its core, the topic of Bir Tawil brings up an important question. Where do statehood, sovereignty, and legitimacy begin? Every nation started as a group of people with an idea claiming a territory as their own. We experience grey areas of sovereignty all the time, from international waters to airport terminals. Other disputed territories highlight these ambiguous zones, but few match the sheer oddity of Bir Tawil. Although no nation claims Bir Tawil, it's important to remember that that doesn't mean it's entirely unwanted. The fact that several individuals have tried to claim it over the years is proof enough of its allure. Noam Blesham, a political geography lecturer at Durham University, remarked, "Its sovereign status is ambiguous, but to argue it's unwanted, that's a big difference." Local nomadic tribes, such as the Ababda and Bisharin, continue to use the land for grazing, trade, and camping, even though there are no permanent settlements. Historical records also show that Bir Tawil has seen use in the past despite its current barren state. In the 21st century, no part of the Earth is truly a dead zone, just waiting for someone to claim it. International law has moved far beyond the days when anyone could show up, plant a flag, and just call it a day. Bir Tawil, as a relic of the colonial era's terra nullius mindset, illustrates just how outdated that thinking is. The idea of claiming uninhabited land was invoked repeatedly during the scramble for Africa, and Bir Tawil's status today mirrors the fate of many nomadic tribal lands that were absorbed into empires. As The Guardian points out, British Commissioner Sir Charles Elliot once justified this land grab in Sudan by saying, "I cannot admit that wandering tribes have a right to keep other and superior races out of large tracts merely because they have acquired the habit of straggling over far more land than they can utilize." While we like to think that colonialism is a relic of the past, and in most respects it is, the attempts to claim Bir Tawil still echo some of those same ideas. People may not be showing up to subjugate others or to extract resources for an empire, but the reasoning behind these claims is eerily similar. Nobody wants this land, nobody uses this land, so I'll take it. For now, Bir Tawil remains what it has always been, an unclaimed territory used by a few nomads and occasionally visited by eccentric individuals with dreams of grandeur. It may one day become more valuable, perhaps due to advances in technology or a shift in regional dynamics. This could potentially resolve the dispute between Egypt and Sudan, with one nation finally renouncing its claim to the Halaib Triangle. But until that day comes, Bir Tawil will remain terra nullius, a no man's land where, at least in theory, anyone could plant a flag and declare themselves its ruler.